Shalom, Israel. Today's topic is Hebrewisms of West Africa. I'm going to talk about the Coromantes and the Ashantis. While all of these things are going on in the world with the wars and rumors of wars, I thought I'd stick to the basics because the time is near. So let me fill you in with some information on who the Negroes are again. This book was written by Joseph J. Williams, and it was printed in 1930. This will be rather quick. This is page 9. The top of the page says Ashanti influence on Jamaican customs. Many of you may not know this, but this is why we're going to talk about the Coromantes. It reads here, the Coromantes, generically Gold Coast slaves. I'm going to read 2 pages here. It says, in any case, sufficient for our present purpose is the explanation of Ellis, when he writes, the Gold Coast Negroes are termed Coromantes or Coromantians in the jargon of the slave traders, this name being a corruption of Coromantine, whence the English had first exported slaves. They were distinguished from all other slaves by their courage, firmness, and impatience of control, characteristics which caused numerous mutinies on board the slavers, and several rebellions in the West Indies. So who are these? These are the Negroes. These are probably your NFL players, your NBA players, your soldiers. These are those men who have no fear of battle, all right? And they still show this trait in today's times. It reads here, in fact, every rebellion of slaves in Jamaica originated with and was generally confined to the Coromantes, and their independence of character became so generally recognized that at one time the legislature of Jamaica proposed that a bill should be brought in for laying an additional duty upon the Fantin, Akin, and Ashanti Negroes, and all others commonly called Coromantes, that should be imported. The superior physique of the Gold Coast Negroes, however, rendered them very valuable as laborers. And this bill met with so much opposition that it was withdrawn. And notwithstanding their dangerous character, large numbers continued to be introduced to the island. They were still importing these Coromantes. All right, so these were the chief Negroes that came over, and they were extreme laborers. Now, this was a trait that has always been within them. While this derivation of the term would include both Fantis and Akims with the Ashanti, different tribes, if you were going biblically, this would be your Judah, this would be your Benjamin, and your Levi. The real Coromantine of type was preeminently an Ashanti, as Sir Harry Johnston clearly recognizes. Moreover, in connection with the fearless independence and uncompromising spirit of the Gold Coast Negro, which is West Africa, whether we call him Ashanti or Coromantian, and Ashanti, the Levites, that word Haiti, when the French went over there, they call it High Hell Mountains, right? Because they were catching hell when they went over there to fight Louverture Toussaint and Cujo. So a lot of the Ashantis were sent to Haiti as well. It is well to remember that the Maroons of the Jamaican mountains, who wrote their own chapter of daring in the history of the island, were for the most part recruited, at least as regards their leaders, from the same group. Let's go to page 10. Hebrewisms of West Africa. Sir William Butler. Most of these were captains, chiefs, or enslavers of European descent who were Edomites, who arrived on the Gold Coast to take part in the Ashanti campaign in October 1873, tells us in his autobiography, this coast has been for 200 and more years the greatest slave preserved in the world. So how can you act like slavery didn't exist? All right? There was a particular people who went into slavery, and we're reading about it. All those castles dotted along the surf-beaten shore at 10 or 12 miles intervals where the prisons were, or where. In the days of the slave trade, millions of wretched Negroes have been immersed, waiting the arrival of slave ships from Bristol or Liverpool to load the human cargo for West Indian or American ports. See that? So these ships were coming from London. It would not be too much to say that from each of these prison castles to some West Indian port, a cable of slave skeletons must be lying at the bottom of the ocean. In that terrible trade, the protected tribes of the coast were the prime brokers. They bought from the black interior kingdoms of Dahomey and Ashanti. Most of us know about these two kingdoms. And they sold to the white merchant traders of Europe. There it is in black and white. Slaves, rum, and gunpowder, which goes into Joel chapter 3, were the chief items in the bills of lading. The gunpowder went to the interior. The rum was drunk on the coast. The slaves, or those who survived among them, went to where? America. If 2 in 10 lived through the horrors of the Middle Passage, the trade paid. This would indicate, first of all, that the Coromantian was not a native of the coast, but was brought from the interior, and secondly, directly indicates the Ashanti as the source of supply. Now, let's find out who these people are. We're going to go to conclusion. And it reads here in the conclusion. To understand properly the spirit and aspirations of the better type of a Jamaica peasant then, a close study of the Ashanti themselves became necessary. And this study in turn led to some startling results and conclusions that have been incorporated into the following pages. In the first place, many Hebrewisms were discovered in the Ashanti tribal customs. Then several Ashanti words were found to have a striking resemblance to those of equivalent Hebrew meaning. Finally, the supreme being of the Ashanti gave strong indication of being the Yahawah of the Old Testament. The question naturally arose how to explain these parallels or cultural traits. How do you explain it? They have to, or they must be the Israelites. Should they be ascribed to mere coincidence, which I would say coinkydink, to independent development, or have we here a remarkable instance of diffusion across the entire breadth of Africa? Yes. Is it possible to establish even a partial historical contact between the Ashanti of today and the Hebrews of fully 2,000 years ago or more? Absolutely. The problem might be approached either by trying to trace the story of the dispersion of the Jews, usually called the diaspora, or by the study of tribal beliefs and practices and the records of early African travelers, particularly of those who had written of the manners and customs of the Negro before the inroads of Islamism had tended to utterly destroy all traditions of the past. So Islam came in, destroyed all Hebrewism except for a couple of pockets. Then the American or the European slave trade came in and just relinquished destruction upon the rest of the people of having an understanding of who they were. Just totally annihilated their understanding and brainwashed them. So these people who we are talking about, who were considered to be the Akan, the Ashanti, the Coromantes, were Israelites. And they were transported all the way to the Americas. And today, these are your Negroes who are in America. Okay, so now I'm going to take you to this book. You can see brothers worshiping the cross and the false image right there, with the Edomite pointing to the false image, which is the abomination of desolation. But it got all the slaves on their knees, and this was the first destructive instrument they used against us when we got to the Americas. These were known as Gullahs worshiping in Goose Creek Church. This is a picture that you should never forget. Look at how they got us being subservient. They didn't really have no chairs back then, so we were on the ground. All right. This book is called A Peculiar People, Slave Religion and Community Culture Among the Gullahs. See that? What was the name of the famous boxer? Joe Frazier. Joe Frazier came from the Gullah projects. All right, he was a Gullah. If you, I believe there's a documentary on Joe Frazier, and in the documentary, he even tells you that he comes from a Gullah people. He had got so brainwashed that when Muhammad Ali was talking trash about him, he couldn't understand that he was an Uncle Tom Negro, but really, his forefathers fought against the enslavers of America, right? But he wasn't privy to that knowledge or that information. That's why he went down. They said, down goes Joe Frazier. That's the reason why he went down. But right, we're going to go to a page here. Let me tell you when this was published. This was published in 1988. Copyright 1988 by New York University. All rights reserved. Manufactured in the United States of America. I'm going to go to page 30. And it says here, Gold Coast Africans were apparently the first black Carolinas. So a lot of the Carolinas, the brothers South and North Carolina, most of them were Coromantes, Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. They were preferred by West Indian adventurers who initially settled Carolina and brought about 1,000 slaves with them. Often referred to as Coromantes or Coromanting. After the coastal factory from which they were first shipped, most of the Africans, generally Akan and Ashanti peoples, were sold into bondage by powerful coast-dwelling Fanti. Now, some of the Fantis were Hamites and Israelites. Famous on West Indian plantations for their work habits, efficiency, and strength, Akan Ashanti groups were also said to possess the haughty spirit that planters associated with rebelliousness. The Coromantes are not only the best and most faithful of our slaves, but are really born heroes, wrote the governor of the Leeward Islands in 1701. He added that there never was a rascal or coward of that nation, intrepid in the last degree. My father, who had studied the genius and temper of all kinds of Negroes for 45 years, this is what they did. They studied us. Just like you have people who study dogs and apex animals. It says, would say no man deserved a Coromante that would not treat him like a friend rather than a slave. Men who made voyages to the Guinea coast occurred with and often fostered attitudes expressed toward Gold Coast Africans. John Atkins, a ship surgeon, considered himself an authority on Africans. Slaves differ in their goodness, he insisted, maintaining that those from the Gold Coast are accounted best, being cleanest limbed and more docile by our settlements than others. That's why you got a lot of ball players playing in the pros, the more docile. But Atkins cautioned that Akan Ashanti were also more prompt to revenge and murder the instruments of their slavery, and also appear in means to compress it. See that? So when you go into Genesis chapter 49 and 5, which is the breakdown of the tribes of Israel, Jacob told his sons what would befall him in the last days. But notice what notice the prophecy of what he said about Simeon and Levi. Remember, the Ashantis and the Coromantes also have Levi in them, and possibly even Simeon. It says, Simeon and Levi are brethren. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. See, that instruments is even mentioned in this book of peculiar people. O my soul, come not thou into their secret, unto their assembly, mine honor. Be not thou united, for in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they dig down a wall. Cursed be their anger. See that? For it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. And that's what happened when we read this book called A Peculiar People. It talks about how the Coromantes, the Akans, the Ashantis, they were all divided within the people, around the Guineas and so forth. I read this last part again. It says, but Akans cautioned that Akan, Ashanti, were also more prompt to revenge and murder the instruments of their slavery, and also apter in means to compress it. So this is telling you right here that all these tribes that I just mentioned, the Akan, the Coromantes, these were the children of Israel. And to put a stamp grade even on that, they were possibly Simeon and Levi because of their cruelty using instruments. Here's a map. It's showing you Africa, and it's showing you arrows where the Coromantes and Ashantis came from. And it's taking them right to the Carolinas, as you can see. South Carolina, Charleston. See that? So a lot of those were Israelites. Most of them were Israelites. Now this is on page 37, because the Israelites were Bantu. It says here on page 37 in the middle of the page where I have it highlighted, it says, percentage-wise, then, Bantu-speaking people apparently comprised the majority of Africans imported to South Carolina. Yet it has generally gone unnoticed that Upper Guinea contributed heavily to the slave populations of the sea islands and surrounding coasts. See that? So a lot of the Guinea Negroes were sent to the islands of the sea. See that? Here's a book. It's called Sex and Race, Negro Caucasian Mixing in All Ages and Lands by J.A. Rogers, Volume 1, The Old World. Yeah, and this book was actually printed in 1968. Let's go to page 91. Page 91 of this book, which is chapter 9. The title of the top page, it reads, Were the Jews Originally Negroes? Let's drop down to the third paragraph. It reads, mention was made of the biblical theory that Negroes became black because Noah, supposedly white, cursed the sons of Ham. But the earliest Jews were in all probability Negroes. Abraham, their ancestor, is said to have come from Chaldea, and the ancient Chaldeans were black. The Chaldees, says Higgins, were originally Negroes, as was said too. Relics of prehistoric Negroes have been discovered in this region. It is even possible that the Jews originated not in Asia, but in Africa. But the point is, Jews were in all probability Negroes. See that? Just so you could get the understanding of the origins of the 12 tribes of Israel. So this is why we fled in Africa. This is why Moses blended in with the Egyptians. Joseph blended in with the Egyptians. Christ himself blended in with the Egyptians. And the Song of Solomon says, I am black but comely. King David said that he was black and ruddy, which means he had reddish black skin. All right, the red hue came out of his black skin, which is telling you that he was of brown skin. So this is where we get to understanding where the West Africans that were deported and transported into the Americas were Israelites. Hey, there's a lot to go over, but we'll just bring out little by little by little. And with that little, you put it together and it becomes a lot. All right? So the breakdowns of who we are will continually come out so you can get more and more understanding. With that, I'm going to say shalom.
This is the word of the Lord of hosts. I took you from the pastures and from following the sheep to be prince over my people Israel. I have been with you wherever you have gone and have destroyed all the enemies in your path. I will make you a great name among the great ones of the earth. I will assign a place for my people in Israel. There I will plant them, and they shall dwell in their own land.